Hi, welcome to another MMI Office Hours. My name is Stefanie Kleinsmith. I'm Director of Operations at Method Media Intelligence. And today we're going to talk about log level data. And in order to help us get a better idea of what this is exactly, we have our MMI Data Ops Super Team, which consists of Cameron Thorn, Global Head of Insights and Analytics, and Stella Rigopoulou, Director of Analytics. So thank you for joining us today. And let's start with what exactly is log level data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at its most basic, it's sort of like the receipts for all of the digital ad impressions that you're buying. So these can come from both the DSP, the demand side platform, as well as from the ad server. So unfortunately, most DSPs and ad servers do not offer this as an out-of-the-box type solution. It is something that you need to request, but it's not overly involved to do so. It's basically access to everything, every single field that they have available for every single impressions, which may be millions, if not billions per month. So it's an enormous amount of data that you can generally get made available to you on, a daily or even an hourly basis. So one thing to keep in mind here is that, the data is there for a certain amount of time with the ad server or the DSP, and then it's gone forever. Their retention period usually is only a matter of a few weeks. So, if you want to look at some analysis from 6 months ago and you haven't requested that data yet, sorry, it's gone. So that's why we sort of recommend to everybody, request it now. You might not have a need for it now, but at least you can get it and you can store it. There's these cold storage places you can get to. It's not too expensive, and then you've got it, so that if you want to look back at it 6 months later, you have that ability to do so.
So from what I'm hearing, it's because the amount of storage that would take to maintain all this data is huge. Is that right?
Yeah, usually we are talking about multiple files that are coming over, like in most cases in an hourly basis. So for example, let's take as an example the Google server. Then in that case, because of the amount of data that they're producing every hour is huge, we're talking about zip files that are pushed to the Google Cloud platform for the specific example. So in a day, we are probably discussing about around 20 to 30 gigabytes for only one day, which is huge. So there are multiple ways to basically get your hands on it. So you can either try to manually get access to those files, so download them and try to open some of them. But if you try to do that for multiple days, you will realize that after a certain time, you won't be able to just only have a spreadsheet with all the data in there. So what is suggested usually is to get access to these kinds of platforms through different ways. One of the ways is using programmatic languages, as for example, Python. For Google Cloud platform, there are specific tools and libraries that you can use to easily access these kind of files. In this case, it's called SDK, which is basically just a library that you can easily access any kind of product or services through Google, and it's the easiest way to get access to those files, aggregate them, manipulate them, and produce something for your client that could actually is useful for them. So it can be either creating a few dashboards, or it could be creating some analysis reports, or even just findings and insights. So in order for automation process, I would say, to happen, it's really important to have like collaboration of multiple teams. In this case, you will definitely need some data engineers, data scientists, and data analysts to work all together in order to end up with these kind of actionable insights for the client.
I can't even imagine the amount of data that you guys have to shift through. I was just thinking about it, makes me cross-eyed. So Excel must be your life.
Well, I have to admit that this is beyond Excel.
Right. You mentioned that because Excel can only contain so many lines. So yeah, so much data. So that's insane. But it does result in very thorough and accurate data sets. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
So now that we have a better idea of what log level data is, and some of the obstacles that come with getting the receipts for every transaction, how are some of the ways that you get your hands on it?
So from like a marketing manager's point of view, all they really have to do is reach out to their DSP or ad server account rep. And, there's multiple different types of logs you can generally get. So you just need to be specific on whether you want ad server logs, DSP logs, unified logs, and you can even, request that you only be delivered certain fields. I think we'll get into this in a minute, but, I think it's dozens of fields that you could be getting access to, some of which might be classed as PII. So if you want to limit that and only say, I just want, cost related data and a unique identifier to join it up to some other data set, you can make that request so that, you're only pulling that type of data through.
Is it better to ask for more fields, or does that cause complications because that's like more data that comes in that you have to figure out how to use?
I mean, I think the standard that we've seen is typically you get everything, but then by working through the process that Stella was describing with sort of automating the capture of that data from, the ad server DSP platform and into your platform, in creating an automated process, you can say, all right, I'm going to grab all this data, but I only want to load columns X, Y, and Z into my system. So that's a nice way that you can keep it simple from a requesting standpoint, but also make sure you're covered from a data privacy standpoint.
And also just to add here, it depends what exactly you want to do with this kind of data. So what kind of insights you want to end up with, because in some cases, you just want to cover for example, the ad cost. So you will only focus on the specific columns related to this one, just to make the whole process a lot easier.
Has there ever been an instance that you can think of where, you pulled certain fields because that's the data that you wanted to focus on at the time, but then later you were like, oh, wait, what about this? And you have to go back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, unfortunately. That's yeah, and I mean, fortunately, you can, if you have a good working relationship, you can generally combat any obstacles like that relatively quickly. But yeah, it's that old adage to have and not need rather than to need and not have.
And usually this is the story of an analyst's life, unfortunately.
You're like, you didn't ask for this at first. Is there usually any difficulty in getting the information or the types of data that you need from clients or other people? Like, is there something that would be useful for third parties to understand in order to make them more willing, to provide the data?
Yeah, I think, it's, without it sounding too self-serving, speaking with a measurement company and having a conversation about what do you want to achieve here? Is it just to gain an understanding at a log level for what your cost is like, or is it to see down the supply path? Sort of set off with this project by having a clear vision for what type of insights you want to gain 1 month from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now. And you can of course always change. You know, these vendors work for the client. They will provide more data when requested to do so. And yeah, so that's the method we would suggest.
And let's not forget that we are talking, so log level data is always like non-sample data. So it's everything, and it's the best way to connect all the different sources, data sources, and link the insight. So follow the path. And for the supply chain, this is the most important one, since we are talking about like food transparency currently. So it's important.
Would you say it's like the purest form of data?
Well, the thing is, I believe that not many publishers and advertisers are using like a lot this log level data. So at this stage, I would say is probably the purest that we could get at that point, but who knows what is going to happen a few years from now.
That's insightful, because as someone who doesn't work closely in this field, you know, you don't really think about, because by the time it reaches me, for instance, it's already like in the dashboard, right? It's like neatly compiled and stuff. I don't have to think about like how the sausage is made in the back end. So it's like interesting to hear about it. And again, a little bit of a headache maker. So thanks for what you do. So we talked about what it is, the logistics of, the mechanics of like how it gets to us and how it's processed. So give us a little insight as to why it's useful and why it's important.
Yeah, well, it's really the opportunity that advertisers have to look under the hood of their DSP or their ad server and gain an understanding for how their spend is operating. As we said, it's 100% of impressions. There's no sampling going on. And it really allows you to connect the dots, so to speak, and to see from the ad server and the DSP, where's your allocation going, whether that's through different exchanges, different sites or sellers. There's a multitudes of ways to split the data. And if you can then incorporate that with, other third-party data or other first-party data, there's some real benefits to be had.
In the ad tech industry, there's a lot of issues with fraud. And it sounds like data or analyzing it properly and getting the proper data can really help with transparency. So would it be fair to say that with this transparency, it would help reduce the amount of instances of fraud that happen?
Yeah, so log level data files are in auction level. So you can just go there and see all the individual auctions that happened within the period that you're analyzing. So it's easy for you or for the advertiser basically to use that as a way to see what is paying for its individual impression. So in that case, for example, they can identify if an impression was a valid impression, and then it's fair for them to pay the fees and the price, the bid price for that, or if it was a non-human impression, where basically they can just go back and take this kind of like tech taxes back, basically. So it's really, this part is very important for the supply chain overall process, because it helps to get the relationship, a better understanding of the relationship between the partners, and actually, in some cases, the advertisers could even like, narrow down their relationships and use fewer partners, where they can get like either better performance of their campaigns and impressions, or to have some a better quality impressions. So I would say it's really, really important in that case.
It's a good way to really understand where your budget is going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can actually track where your budget is going.
That brings up an interesting question. Is there a way to trick log level data?
Not that I'm aware of.
Ah.
Yeah, maybe somebody cleverer than me has come up with a method, but no, I think, this is as close as we have to the truth, that everything that goes out of that ad server, that DSP, is getting recorded in the log. So I can't see any way that it could be altered in any way.
At least not easily. It would take, it would probably take a lot of effort. Like it would be noticeable if someone was manipulating it that much, to the point where it can be tricked. That's interesting. So I guess the biggest obstacle, or perhaps why it's not an industry standard to incorporate log level data and to track all the receipts of transaction, is merely because of the sheer amount of data that it produces, and then trying to figure out how to analyze that. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's time and effort. It's it takes quite a bit to be pulling this data, to be analyzing it, and if you just get told, here's your summary report, you might not feel the need, but from what we found, it's always valuable to go back and look at the logs.
Right. So it's there. The way to circumvent, lack of transparency is there. It's just, it's hard. There's no easy way to do it. Yeah. But we do it, so that's cool. And I can understand, and speaking to engineers and stuff, they say when they speak to their other friends who are engineers, and they explain the amount of data that we take in per day, everyone is usually blown away because it's just like, it's 5 or 10 times more. So I'm not quite sure what the numbers are, than what the average amount that people usually see. So cool. Okay, so now that we have all this information about the what, how, and why, is there, like, what, I think you touched upon it, but maybe you have specific use cases that you want to share? What can you do with it beyond just what we described on a high level?
Yes, so basically we're using this kind of data to do a comparison between the DSP and the ad server data. So we can get an idea if there is any leak of the impressions in the meanwhile of the process. And also we can use that for some post-campaign analysis to get a better understanding of campaigns that perform better regarding budgeting, or we need to change the kind of tactics that actually the advertiser needs to change the kind of tactics that they're using in order to get better results, depending every time what they are interested in. If it is either in impressions or clicks or whatsoever.
What does MMI do with it? I mean, it sounds like everything that we covered, obviously you touched upon, but is there something more that you want to highlight about how MMI processes the data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the benefits that we have is we deploy as an impression event tag in an ad server. And basically we're able to include what's called macros in that tag, so that we can, although we're in the ad server, we can still get some of the fields of data from the DSP. So one of those fields being the auction ID, which is a bit like a unique reference number that you can then use to join up to the DSP data. And then likewise, depending on the ad server and DSP, we have a unique identifier that you can use to join up to the ad server data. So then there becomes this chain of your log level data from the ad server can be joined to the MMI data. And then the MMI data can be joined to the DSP data. So all of a sudden you start to get this idea of the supply path, because you can essentially join all the way from the ad server through our data to the DSP data.
Your dot connectors.
I wanted that as my title. But.
Yeah, right. No, that's interesting because I think typically people don't think about how everything needs to be connected, because you get a summary report or something from one part of that chain, and sometimes you're like, oh well, that's enough, this looks good enough, but without the follow through of like did it really do what it say, or did it really go where it said it went, and without having that proof, how do you prove that actually was the case? So I can see where there's a lot of opportunity for fraud, because the different sections of the chain can be a bit disjointed. So is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the big thing with data that people oftentimes connect is, what about the privacy aspect? How do you address the privacy concern? Because you don't want data leaked.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at some of the biggest GDPR fines that have ever been handed out, they're often to do with data breaches, data leaks. And we've had conversations internally where some people say that data is like the new oil, that it's incredibly valuable, but can be incredibly toxic if there's a leak. And if you're dealing with PII, personally identifiable information, it compounds the issue. So the best practice that we always try to utilize is, let's not ingest any data that we don't need. And typically we don't care about the user so much as we care about the device and whether or not fraud happened and whether or not viewability happened and what the cost was and what the supply chain was. So we try to minimize any risk by not taking on any data that we don't need, and especially trying to stay away from any personally identifiable information.
And I guess you don't need the user level data as much when you're just trying to follow the impression, and like if it went through the chain the way that it claimed it did. So and I would say the difference between an oil spill and a data leak is that you don't have to wash birds in Dawn soap afterwards. Although it's very bad. Of course, you never want a data leak. It's not as bad for the environment. Thank you, Cameron and Stella. This has been really informative. It's good to know that, to see like how data appears. It doesn't just like pop up on your dashboard on the UI. That's usually a beautiful UI and easy for the user to interpret. So thank you for the work that you do. It sounds complicated and sometimes messy, but it's appreciated, and it's really important if you want to understand the truth of where your money goes. So your advertising money goes. So thank you all for joining us. We were happy to have you for another edition of MMI Office Hours, and we hope to see you at the next one. Take care. Bye.
Bye.